Some questions reveal more about the person asking than they realize, the kind that expose wounds so deep they've become part of identity, scars worn like armor that both protects and isolates. For King Theon, who'd spent 3 centuries learning to function despite being fundamentally damaged by immortality and loss, that question came from a woman sitting across from him in his private study, with haunted eyes and trembling hands. Sarah, the diplomatic envoy from a neighboring kingdom, who'd been negotiating a trade treaty for 3 weeks, had just finished explaining why she couldn't accept his dinner invitation. Not because of protocol or propriety, but because of something far more complicated and painful. She'd been hurt before, badly enough that the damage was permanent, and she couldn't risk it happening again. "Can you love someone broken?" She'd asked it quietly, like she already knew the answer would be no.
Someone who's been shattered and put back together wrong, someone who flinches at touch and has nightmares and can't be what normal people expect in relationships, because I'm that person. I'm broken in ways that don't heal, and I need to know if you're asking me to dinner because you see me or because you see potential that doesn't actually exist. Theon had looked at this woman who carried damage like he carried his, who understood that some wounds become permanent parts of who you are, and felt something shift in his chest. "That's all I know how to do." His voice was rough with honesty he hadn't intended to share. "I've spent 300 years loving broken things. Broken kingdoms, broken people, broken parts of myself. It's the only kind of love I understand. So yes, Sarah, I can love someone broken. The real question is whether you can let me." Sarah had been raised in a noble family that valued perfection above everything.
Her father was a high-ranking diplomat who demanded flawless performance. Her mother was a social strategist who treated every interaction as political maneuvering. Sarah and her 2 siblings were raised to be perfect representatives of their family name. Perfect manners, perfect accomplishments, perfect marriages to appropriate partners. There was no room for weakness or failure. Mistakes weren't learning opportunities. They were embarrassments to be punished and erased. Sarah had been good at perfection, excelled at languages and diplomacy, mastered the social skills required for political advancement. By 20, she was conducting minor negotiations for her family. By 25, she was representing her kingdom in trade discussions. She was brilliant at reading people and finding mutually beneficial solutions. She was also desperately lonely in ways she couldn't articulate. Being perfect meant never being real, never showing uncertainty or vulnerability, never forming genuine connections because relationships required exposing imperfection. At 28, she'd made a mistake, trusted the wrong person, let down her guard with someone who'd seemed kind and understanding, but was actually calculating and cruel. She thought she was falling in love. Turned out she was being manipulated for political advantage. When she discovered the betrayal, when she realized everything she'd shared in confidence was being used against her family, something in her broke. Not dramatically, quietly, like a crack in glass that spreads slowly until the whole structure is compromised. She'd managed the political fallout professionally, minimized damage, protected her family's interests, maintained perfect composure through the crisis. But internally, she'd shattered. The trust she'd extended had been weaponized. The vulnerability she'd risked had been exploited. The person she thought she was becoming was revealed as foolish and naive. She rebuilt herself more carefully this time. Stronger walls, better defenses, absolute commitment to never being that vulnerable again. She returned to work, excelled at her duties, became even more skilled at diplomacy. But she also became fundamentally closed off, couldn't form real connections, couldn't trust anyone enough to be genuine, couldn't imagine ever again being the person who believed love was possible. 3 years after the betrayal, she'd been assigned to negotiate a trade treaty with King Theon's kingdom. important work that required weeks of direct discussion with the king himself. She'd approached it as just another professional obligation: research the counterpart, understand their priorities, find mutually beneficial solutions, execute the negotiation perfectly. What she hadn't expected was for Theon to be different than other rulers she'd worked with. Most kings were predictable, wanted advantage, prestige, demonstration of power, negotiated from ego and expectation of deference. Theon negotiated like someone who actually cared about outcomes beyond personal gain. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions that showed genuine interest in understanding her kingdom's needs, offered concessions that benefited both parties rather than maximizing his own position. After the first week of negotiations, Sarah was confused. After the second week, she was curious. This wasn't how powerful men typically behaved. There had to be an angle she wasn't seeing. By the third week, she'd started to think maybe there wasn't an angle. Maybe he was just different. The treaty discussions happened mostly in his private study rather than formal throne room. More comfortable, he'd explained, and better for actual conversation versus political theater. Sarah had appreciated the informality, even as it made her nervous. Formal settings had scripts. Private conversations required authenticity she wasn't sure she could access anymore. But Theon made it easier than expected. He talked about the challenges of governance, the frustration of making decisions with incomplete information. He asked about her work, her perspective on diplomacy, her experiences with different kingdoms. He was funny in understated ways that caught her off guard, and he was clearly lonely in ways that felt familiar. 3 centuries of immortal rule, he'd mentioned once, makes relationships complicated. Everyone you care about eventually dies. You learn to maintain distance, or you spend eternity grieving. Easier to focus on duty and accept isolation as cost of living forever. Sarah had understood that more than she'd wanted to admit. She'd chosen isolation too, for different reasons, but with similar results. They'd started having dinners while working, practical at first, just efficient use of time, then increasingly social, conversations that drifted from policy to personal. Sarah found herself actually enjoying his company, looking forward to their meetings, feeling something that might have been the beginning of genuine connection, which terrified her, because connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant potential for being hurt again. When Theon had invited her to dinner, that wasn't about work, just social. Her immediate instinct was to refuse. But he'd been kind and respectful for 3 weeks, had shown her consideration and genuine interest. She couldn't just say no without explanation. So she tried to explain why she couldn't accept, about being broken and unable to be what normal people expected, about not wanting to lead him on when she couldn't offer what he probably wanted, about needing him to understand she was fundamentally damaged in ways that didn't heal. His response had shocked her. That's all I know how to do. Like loving broken people was normal, like her damage wasn't disqualifying. She'd stared at him, trying to process.
What does that mean? It means I've spent 300 years watching people I care about die, losing everyone I've ever loved to time and age and mortality, while I continue on. That breaks something fundamental in you, makes connection feel temporary and painful, makes isolation seem safer than risking attachment. He'd met her eyes directly. I'm broken too, Sarah, just in different ways. So when you ask if I can love someone broken, the answer is yes, because that's all I know. Broken people loving broken people. It's not perfect, but it's real. She'd felt tears threaten. I don't know how to do this. How to be vulnerable when being vulnerable got me destroyed. How to trust when trust was used against me. How to be anything other than perfect because perfect is safe. You don't have to know how. He'd said it gently. We figure it out together. 2 broken people learning what's possible when you stop pretending to be whole. That's all I'm asking for.
A chance to see if we can build something from our respective pieces. What if I can't? What if I'm too damaged? Then we discover that together too. He'd leaned forward slightly. But Sarah, I've lived 3 centuries. I've seen every kind of damage you can imagine. You're not uniquely broken. You're just hurt in ways you haven't learned to live with yet. That's different. There's hope in that. She'd wanted to believe him, wanted to think maybe her damage wasn't permanent disqualification from connection. But 3 years of careful walls were hard to dismantle. I need time to think about this, to decide if I can actually try. Take whatever time you need. His voice was patient. I'm not going anywhere. I've been alone for 300 years. I can wait for someone worth waiting for. And you, Sarah, are worth waiting for. She'd spent 3 days avoiding him, finished the treaty negotiations through written correspondence rather than in-person meetings. Tried to convince herself that going back to her kingdom and forgetting this connection was safer, but she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, that loving broken people was all he knew how to do, that she wasn't uniquely damaged, just hurt in ways she hadn't learned to live with yet, that there was hope in trying, even if she didn't know how. On the 4th day, she'd gone to his study. He'd been working on correspondence, had looked up when she entered with an expression that was carefully neutral, protecting himself from potential rejection, she realized. He was as scared as she was. I don't know how to do this, she'd said it immediately, before courage failed. Don't know how to be vulnerable or trust or believe this won't end badly. But I'm tired of being perfect and alone. Tired of living inside walls that keep me safe, but also keep me isolated. So if you meant what you said about broken people figuring it out together, I want to try, even though I'm terrified. He'd smiled, genuine and relieved. Terrified is good. It means it matters. We can work with terrified. Their first actual date was awkward, both of them trying to be genuine while also managing their respective damage. Sarah kept catching herself falling into diplomatic mode, performing instead of being real. Theon kept watching her like he was afraid she'd bolt. By the end of dinner, they were both exhausted from trying so hard. This is harder than I expected, Sarah had admitted. I don't know how to just be myself. I've spent so long being perfect that I forgot who I actually am underneath. Show me the imperfect parts. He'd said it simply. That's what I want to see. Not the diplomatic envoy or the perfect noble daughter. The person underneath, who's scared and damaged and trying anyway. I don't know if you'll like that person. She's messy and insecure and has nightmares about being betrayed again. I already like her because she's honest about being messy. That's better than pretending to be perfect. They'd started meeting regularly after that. Not formal dates, but time together, learning each other. Sarah practiced being imperfect, admitting when she was anxious, sharing actual opinions instead of diplomatic neutrality, letting her see the parts of herself she usually hid. Theon practiced being present, despite 3 centuries of emotional distance, opening up about his loneliness, sharing vulnerabilities he usually kept private, letting her matter despite knowing attachment meant eventual loss. It wasn't smooth. Sarah had panic attacks when intimacy felt too intense, would shut down and retreat behind walls. Theon struggled with his instinct to maintain distance, would pull back when connection got too real. They fought sometimes, about trust, about vulnerability, about whether what they were building was sustainable. But they also kept trying, kept showing up, kept choosing each other despite fear. The turning point came 3 months into their relationship. Sarah had received news that the man who'd betrayed her was trying to undermine the treaty she'd negotiated with Theon, was spreading lies about her credibility and competence, was attempting to damage her professional reputation because he was vindictive and cruel. She'd handled it professionally at first, documented the lies, prepared responses, managed the political fallout. But privately, she was collapsing. The betrayal was happening again. 3 years of rebuilding herself, and he was still finding ways to hurt her. Theon found her in his study late at night, surrounded by documents and clearly spiraling. What happened? He'd sat beside her carefully, mindful of her space. The person who hurt me 3 years ago is trying to do it again. She'd explained the situation with shaking voice. I thought I was past this, thought I'd build walls strong enough that he couldn't touch me, but he's still finding ways to damage me. I'm still that broken person he created. You're not broken because of him. Theon's voice was firm. You're wounded, There's a difference. He damaged you, but he doesn't define you. And what he's doing now is desperate attempt to maintain power over you. Don't give him that. How do I stop him? She'd felt tears start. How do I protect myself when he keeps finding new ways to hurt me? You don't do it alone. He'd taken her hand carefully. You let people who care about you help. You build support systems instead of just walls. You recognize that being hurt doesn't make you broken. It makes you someone who survived something terrible and is still trying. That's strength, not weakness. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm falling apart. Then fall apart. His voice was gentle. But fall apart with me here. Stop pretending you have to hold everything together perfectly. Let yourself be hurt and scared and angry. Let me help carry it. She'd looked at him through tears. Why would you do that? Why would you take on my damage? Because I love you. He'd said it simply, like it was obvious. And loving someone means being present for the hard parts, means helping them survive the things that try to break them, means choosing them even when they're falling apart. You love me? Her voice was small. Even though I'm a mess? Especially because you're a mess. He'd pulled her closer. I told you, loving broken people is all I know how to do. And you, falling apart and scared and trying anyway, that's the realest thing I've seen in 300 years. I love you for it. The revelation had broken something in her. Not damaged, but opened. She'd cried against his chest for hours, let herself fully feel the fear and hurt and rage she'd been managing perfectly for 3 years. Let him hold her through it without trying to fix it, just being present while she fell apart. When she finally calmed, exhausted and raw, she'd said something she'd never admitted to anyone. I'm terrified of trusting you. Terrified that you'll hurt me like he did. That this is another manipulation I'm too stupid to see. That I'll give you everything and you'll use it against me. I know. His voice was calm. And I can't promise I won't hurt you. People hurt each other even when they don't mean to. What I can promise is that it won't be deliberate. That if I do hurt you, I'll take responsibility and work to repair it. That I'm choosing to be here through the hard parts, not just when it's easy. How do I trust that? You practice, one small risk at a time. You tell me one vulnerable thing and see what I do with it. If I handle it well, you risk a little more. We build trust slowly, through demonstrated safety over time. It's not romantic. It's just consistent showing up. She thought about that, about the weeks he'd spent being patient and kind, about how he'd listened without judgment, about how he was here now, holding her while she fell apart.
Not running despite the messiness. Maybe I can try that. Good. He'd kissed her forehead. That's all I'm asking. Just try. I'll be here while you do. They dealt with a political attack together. Theon used his resources and connections to counter the lies, made it clear that attacking Sarah meant attacking an ally of his kingdom, put political pressure on the man until the campaign fell apart. Not protecting her because she was helpless, but supporting her because partnership meant sharing resources. Sarah learned what it felt like to not handle crisis alone, to have someone actively helping instead of just watching, to be cared for in practical ways that mattered. The relationship deepened after that, slowly, carefully, but steadily. Sarah practiced vulnerability in small doses, would tell Theon when she was anxious instead of hiding it, would ask for support instead of pretending she was fine, would let him see her imperfect and scared and trying anyway.
Yoren practiced commitment despite his immortal instinct toward distance, would make plans for the future instead of treating everything as temporary, would share his own fears about inevitable loss, would choose her repeatedly, even when his self-protective instinct said to pull back. They were both still broken, but they were learning to be broken together, which was different than being broken alone. A year after the question that started everything, during a quiet evening in quarters they now shared, Sarah asked him something she'd been wondering about.
When you said loving broken people is all you know how to do, did you mean it, or were you just trying to make me feel better? I meant it. He'd set down his book. I've spent 3 centuries loving a kingdom that was broken when I took the throne and has needed constant repair ever since. Loving people who were damaged by war or loss, or the cruelty of living.
Loving parts of myself that were destroyed by outliving everyone I cared about. I don't know how to love perfect things. They don't need what I have to offer. But broken things, wounded people, those I understand. That makes me feel less defective. She'd settled against him. Like, my damage isn't disqualifying. It's not defective to be hurt. It's human. He'd run fingers through her hair. What's defective is expecting people to be undamaged. Everyone's broken somehow. Some of us are just more honest about our cracks. I'm still scared sometimes that you'll wake up and realize I'm too much work, that my damage is permanent and you'll get tired of managing it, that I'll never be the easy partner you deserve. Then be scared with me. His voice was gentle. Because I'm scared too. Scared that my immortality means I'll watch you die eventually. Scared that 300 years of distance make me bad at intimacy. Scared that I'll fail you when you need me most. We're both disasters.
Just very carefully managed ones. She'd smiled against his chest. At least we're disasters together. Best thing I could ask for. They'd sat in comfortable silence, 2 broken people who'd learned to love each other's cracks, living proof that damage doesn't disqualify you from connection, that being honest about being broken is better than pretending to be whole, that the right person doesn't fix you, but stands beside you while you learn to live with your scars, and that sometimes the most powerful love comes from 2 wounded people who understand that healing isn't about becoming undamaged. It's about learning to be broken and loved simultaneously. 2 years into their relationship, Sarah's assignment to Theon's kingdom became permanent, not because of political necessity, but because they'd both admitted they didn't want to be apart. She took a formal diplomatic position that let her stay. They married quietly, a small ceremony with close friends, rather than political spectacle.
The vows were honest about who they were. Sarah promised to keep practicing vulnerability even when it scared her, to trust him with her broken parts, to believe that love could exist alongside damage. Theon promised to choose her repeatedly, despite immortal instinct toward distance, to love her broken parts as much as her whole ones, to build a life with her despite knowing he'd eventually lose her. When they were alone after the ceremony, Sarah had said something she'd needed to say. "Thank you for answering my question honestly, for not pretending you could love me despite being broken, for understanding it's not despite, it's because of. That's who I am, not perfect or undamaged, just broken and trying." He'd held her close, and that's exactly who I love. The trying matters more than the damage. The courage to keep going despite being hurt. That's what makes you extraordinary. Not perfection, persistence despite pain. They built a life that acknowledged their respective damage.
Sarah had bad days where trust was impossible and she retreated behind walls. Theon had periods where fear of eventual loss made him emotionally distant. They learned to recognize the patterns, to give each other space when needed, but also to show up consistently, to understand that loving broken people meant accepting the hard days alongside the good ones. The kingdom benefited from Sarah's permanent presence. She brought diplomatic skills and perspective that improved foreign relations. She also brought vulnerability to court culture, was open about having therapy, about managing anxiety, about being imperfect while still being competent. It changed how the kingdom viewed mental health and emotional wellness. 5 years into their marriage, 10 years into their relationship, Sarah asked him the question one final time. Can you love someone broken? Still? After all this time of managing my damage? Theon had smiled. That's all I know how to do. Still. Always. Because loving you taught me that broken isn't the opposite of lovable. It's just another way of being human. And I love your particular way of being human, cracks and all. If this story reminded you that being broken doesn't disqualify you from love, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment with the word moon if you believe damaged people deserve connection and care. Share this video with someone who needs to know that the right person loves you for your scars, not despite them. Sometimes the most powerful love comes from two broken people who understand healing isn't about becoming perfect, but about being accepted while imperfect. Thanks for watching, and remember, we're all carrying damage, and the bravest thing we can do is let someone love us anyway.